Hey, look, I'm live. Ha ha ha. It's been a while since I've done one of these live stream kind of things, but I thought I would come on and just say hi and talk about um, Linux, I guess. So yeah, let's see if this thing is actually going live, just to make sure. I don't know. I haven't done. It's been so long since I've done one of these things that I kind of forget if it's all going. But if you are out there and you're seeing me, then let me know. Seems to be seems to be that I'm going live. Hold on, I'm just going to check this. Oh my God, there I am. I can see myself. That's scary. Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. Now I am here with you. I thought I would take a moment to just say um, sorry about the death of Linux magazines. Got you. Got to get some clickbait on somehow, right? But what I actually mean, what am I talking about here? What guff am I talking about? Now this is not new news, um, but last month, and I thought it might not be brand new news, but that doesn't matter because the topic is still potentially relevant. Um, and what I want to show you is Linux format version 1. I'm going to show you this in a second because I think this is so cute and so lovely and such a great look back down memory lane. So I'm going to show you that in a moment. But first, I just wanted to talk about this. So basically, Linux format was one of the first Linux magazines out there. In fact, Linux Answers was the magazine that's kind of predecessor, and it only came out for one issue. It was the granddaddy of Linux format. So Linux Answers came out, and this one was very special to me because it kind of kick-started my career in Linux. And I think this particular issue had wasn't definite Linux because that was on Linux format. I want to say it was like Red Hat Linux 6 or something like that on the front cover CD. But in any case, before I go into that, 25 years of the Linux format magazine, and the last issue was released at the end of May there. Now, it's pretty sad, to be honest with you, because that is the end of one of the preeminent Linux print magazines, and it kind of shows the future of where we're going. And you could be a pessimist and say, well, we're going to a graveyard of the dead internet, right? And the dead internet, in case you haven't heard about it, is basically a world where the internet is run by AI slop. And we're actually living in a world where the dead internet theory is actually true, from a perspective, and that perspective is that to become the dead internet, you have to be more than 50% of the internet's traffic needs to be generated by a machine, whether that's AI or whether that's just something else. The thing is that we have now passed that precipice. So all the logging and monitoring and systems out there has actually found out that the majority of traffic, more than 50%, is system generated, is automatic, it's bots, it's AI, it's whatever, but it's not human beings, right? 51% or something like that now is not human beings. So next time you look at some content, something written, whether that's on Wikipedia or a news site or anything journalistic, think back to a simpler time, say in 1999 when Linux Answers came out, or the year 2000 when Linux Format issue 1, May of 2000, and think about reading magazines of its time. In fact, reading anything on the internet. And and you think the thing that really brings it to mind, and I'll show you in just a moment when we flick through a couple of pages in Linux format 001, is that we had this kind of thing called journalism back in those days, and real humans wrote real journalistic pieces. Like there was actual content out there that people would go ahead and spend time actually writing and making cool stuff. Whereas nowadays the temptation is to use ChatGPT or similar to write an article. And not only is that temptation there, but it's actually kind of got to the point where funding, if you think about where funding comes from, funding for magazines like this used to come from people buying them off the shelf in a shop, going with your feet, walking somewhere. People buy things online these days. So you're not going to the shops, okay. But then the other source of income for these magazines was subscriptions. So they could pay subscriptions and get them delivered to your house. Again, the numbers of those was dwindling significantly, and therefore it made no sense for Linux format to stay around. So you've got those kind of income streams, they're gone. So how do you push content on your magazines? How do you actually write that content? You've got to pay for your journalists, right? Where's the money coming from to pay for the journalists? The money's coming from ads. And the ads, the people who provide the ads, they have a say in what does and does not get said in the magazines. So all of a sudden, people who had this sort of journalistic integrity, who would go off and do proper pieces, proper journalistic pieces of interesting news, they're all kind of now beholden to the man with the money and saying, you've got to say something nice about us, or you've got to talk in a way that's, beholden to our shareholders. And so it starts to get a bit crap. And then on top of that, the salaries that journalists could once earn by writing these proper articles has diminished significantly over the last 25 years as we've gone into a world where the internet exists and people are not expecting to pay for subscriptions to news sites or magazines. Like, if you go to The Guardian and look for news on The Guardian's website, they're one of the last news sources that are actually asking you to pay a subscription. And quite rightly, they've got to pay their journalists. And they believe that whether you agree with the journalists at The Guardian or not, that's beside the point. But they have journalists, they pay their journalists, and they believe that they have journalistic integrity. How do they continue paying for those journalists? Well, that's the big question. So they want you to have a subscription to The Guardian. And it's one of the few kind of holdouts of that kind of model of subscription on the internet. It's a dying breed, right? Whether The Guardian will be around in 5, 10, maybe even less than 5 years, I don't know. It's a scary situation to be in. But if you think about it, so there's less salary for these journalists, and in fact, there's even less journalists. So when you're writing news or anything like that, what's the chances that editorial that you read is actually written by AI? Because the main intent of these publishers is now not to get subscriptions, it's to get somebody clicking on the ad. And so all the publishers care about is actually having people look at a page so that they can see the ad or click the ad. And that model has changed rapidly over 25 years. And so anyway, enough of me ranting on, but I just wanted to kind of talk about that briefly and say that, especially now with AI, the world is massively changing, and it's really the world out there is going to change. And I think the final part I will say about AI specifically is if we have content that is written almost solely by AI, we've got to a point already, I believe, where all of the content in the world that's been published has been sucked up by the likes of OpenAI. So there's now no more original content. So we've got to that kind of upper limit already. And so if you're asking AI to write original content and there's no more for it to write, it's just going to mush stuff together that's previously been written. And at some point, we're not going to have original content. And that's kind of scary. Like, where are we going to get new content from if nobody is incentivized to actually write? I don't know why that is. Hi. Hopefully you guys can hear me. I've had to swap microphone, which is really, really annoying because I usually like to talk on a reasonably good microphone. So very disappointing that that microphone has died. Probably had enough of listening to me drone on about Linux. Um, Hello. Hey, there we go. I'm back. I'm back on the microphone. I just I just swapped it over on the USB port, and all of a sudden it came back. Anyway, look, apologies for losing sound, and thank you to Jarl and to Was Josh for letting me know my audio had disappeared there. Otherwise, I would have never have known, and I'd blissfully talked to nobody. So thanks, guys, in the comments for letting me know. Where was I? So basically, I was just ranting on and saying that Linux helped me learn everything about computers that I ever I ever did in my career. Basically, this was the beginning to everything. And I think today it's so much easier to use Linux than it ever has been before. So there is no reason why you wouldn't. If you've got any interest in IT and want to work in IT, if you're just starting out, Linux is a great platform to do so. And I see sensations on YouTube, such as PewDiePie, are getting in on the act now as well. Are we reading this? Are we reading this? Are we reading the magazine? Do you mean, Was Josh? Yes, yes, we're going to read this. We're gonna. Well, we don't have to read anything. I'll show you. But have a look anyway. So here is the front cover of a Linux format, the very first edition, which came out in May of 2000. And I just thought I'd show you some images of a simpler time. So we're not going to read this thing cover to cover. Don't worry about it. But look, there you go, May 2000, Linux format 1. And it came with a distro, which, to be honest with you, I kind of never heard of since. And it was called Definite Linux, and I think it was an RPM, a Red Hat based Linux. So it was probably based off of Red Hat 6.2 or something like that. So let's look into this. First of all, open up with an ad for SUSE Linux. SUSE, the Linux experts. I don't know if they're going to be able to say that these days, but how the mighty have fallen. But, you know, SUSE is still around. And then we go here with an advert straight away for the competitor. The number one competitor to SUSE was Red Hat at the time, and Red Hat obviously acquired by IBM. So mainly, I think, back in the day, Linux format was actually written by just three people: Nick Veach, Chris Crooks, who did the art, and Richard Drummond, who is the main staff writer. And I think that was pretty much it. They obviously had the whole team at Future Publishing behind them, but it was just basically these three guys, three nerdy guys. I'm pretty sure they wouldn't be upset by me saying that. Anyway, they had a few articles, but you know, they had to kind of make up stuff because this was their first edition. Linux in Action, and it was about a bunch of school kids really making an AI application, which I find really fascinating. They made an AI application, and this is in the year 2000, and they did it for their school prize, or their sort of entry into the world of IT or something like that. And then there's a bit of licensing of all the cool things to talk about in your first magazine. I mean, they really must have been struggling to write things, but they wrote an article on open source. I think they should have changed the title, because nobody wants to read an article on licensing. But if they juiced it up a bit, maybe they could have talked about how cool open source is and what the difference between open source is. And I think it goes into that in the article. But licensing is not cool. So I'll just go into it here. I think this is where it starts to get really a sign of the time, right? So in my mind, when I think about the year 2000, I think about the year 2000 being like 5 years ago, not 25 years ago. And then it's only when I started looking at this magazine does it start to hit home just how far away the year 2000 was. So put your comments in the chat if you can remember Netscape, Netscape web browser. And in fact, it wasn't just Netscape, it was Netscape Communicator. So there's like Netscape Mail, which was it became Thunderbird eventually, but there was all these sort of things that were integrated into Netscape. And so yeah, the icons are down the bottom here. You've got the web browser, you've got the email client, you've got AIM, Instant Messenger. I think there was a news groups thing as well, Usenet. So just cool. And this was the preview release of Netscape 6, the shape of browsers to come. So just awesome to see. just to see what web browsing looked like in the year 2000. And this kind of, it feels like this should be 1995, but no, this is Netscape, the web browser, the precursor to Firefox on Linux in the year 2000. Jarl says, I remember dialing into AOL. We all do. In fact, I only dialed into AOL like twice and thought, this sucks. I want normal vanilla internet. I don't want AOL's homogenized version of the internet. But yeah, there it is, a client for AOL Instant Messenger, and the sidebar appeared in Mozilla. So yeah, basically, I think not long after this, things went south for Netscape, and then of course there was the Mozilla browser for a while, and then there was the Phoenix from the ashes, which became Firefox. SUSE now for the PowerPC platform. So obviously PowerPC generally was Macintosh computers. And SUSE has a reputation for good, solid, and reliable Linux distributions, so it'll be interesting to see how it copes with the varyingly capable G3 and G4 Macs. G3s were very underpowered at the time. The PPC version is the product of some six months hard work by the SUSE team. This first beta was shown at Macworld in January and went down pretty well. An insider told us progression to the PPC wasn't that hard. SUSE uses a sophisticated automatic build procedure for the software packages contained in the SUSE Linux distribution in conjunction with the necessary modifications of the Linux kernel done by the Linux community. So, I mean, that's wild. The Mac platform is currently attracting a lot more interest from Linux users due to the particularly good performance-price ratio on the G4, as well as Apple's current interest in all things open source. Now, I don't know what the interest from Apple was in the year 2000 with open source, because if you think about back in the year 2000, pretty sure that was pre OS 10 or OS X. So, in fact, there it says Apple recently released Darwin, the prototype for the forthcoming OS 10, as open source software. Now, I don't know if it stayed open source. I don't know if Darwin. Maybe let me know in the comments if Darwin, was open source. Now, Darwin itself was just the kernel and its surrounding tools. It wasn't the actual, or it still isn't the full operating system. It's just the sort of core component of the kernel and the operating system. Now, who can remember this? Corel Linux. Now, if Corel rings any bells to some of you, Corel was the company that Giles says that Apple wanted Darwin to be a community operating system. I wonder who put the spanner in the works there. Was it Steve Jobs? It would have been great. Imagine if OS 10 came out basically as a Linux competitor and they said, hey, we've got an open source OS 10 operating system. Can you imagine how different the world would have been? Where would Linux be today if that reality came along? Because if at that point in time, in around the year 2000, maybe 1999, I don't know if you have seen it. There's a video I've got on the YouTube channel about Rhapsody. Rhapsody was the sort of pre-release version of OS 10, and it was wild. It was really wild because Rhapsody had skin like OS 9. So it still looked like the classic Mac experience, but it was running Darwin and OpenStep, basically the next, which became OS 10. So it was this, Unix-based operating system environment with a Mac OS 9 front end. It was wild, absolutely wild. And then, could you imagine if that then turned into OS 10, but they decided to release that not only on PPC, but on Intel? And so, which they did. So one of the versions of Rhapsody was released both for Intel and for PPC. So imagine a world where you had basically Apple giving away their operating system and it being open source. What would have happened to Linux? That is a very, very crazy thought, to be honest with you, Jarl. I think it could have been really, really interesting, because I think people would have gone, well, I don't have to pay for operate OS 10, and it will work on any PC, so why should I bother getting Linux? Because I can get all the good stuff from Linux, all the GIMP and LibreOffice if I want. I can get it on OS 10, and everybody's happy, and it's open source, and yeah, that would be wild. So Jarl says that was basically the vision, but it did not come to be. So I wonder who put the spoils on that. That would be fascinating to find out. Maybe there is a video on the channel to find out. Even today, the meat and potatoes of macOS Darwin is still open source, but they don't do anything to support building it, although there is a project. Pure Darwin. Not aware of Pure Darwin. Let's have a look. Pure Darwin. What is that? Yeah, I mean, I was aware of the fact that Darwin itself, which was a sort of a fork off NetBSD, wasn't it, or one of the BSDs? But I mean, it's just the core, right? It's not any of the front end, not in the GUI, nothing like that. It's just the core, right? So what does this say? Pure Darwin aims to make Apple's open source Darwin OS more usable. It's still actively maintained as of last year. While development has been relatively slow, the project continues to progress community contributions. Pure Darwin focuses on creating a usable, bootable system that is independent of macOS, relying solely on Darwin and other open source tools. I mean, yeah, but the reverse is now, what's the point in doing that? It's interesting as a purely technical perspective, but, why? Anyway, this one's cool. I think that I don't know what happened to Corel, but Corel did Corel Draw. And back in the days of Windows 3.1, I really liked Corel Draw. Like, I thought Corel Draw was a great drawing product. It was like kind of Adobe Illustrator. I think by the year 2000, it was no longer the flagship, but it would be interesting to see how this progressed. So I think what was going to happen here is Corel Linux came along, and they packaged Corel Draw and all of their other Corel products, so the Corel Photo Paint, inside of their Linux distribution. So they were kind of, at one point, they decided to go all in on Linux, which was pretty wild. Rob says, did Corel not own PaintShop Pro? Rob, I think they did. I think the PaintShop Pro was a shareware application back in the day, and was its own thing. And then I think Corel acquired it. So I like this bit here. Linux community. On a features basis, Photo Paint doesn't offer much over the GIMP software, but feature-wise, Corel Draw is way ahead of any open source drawing software for Linux. So it would have been interesting to see the release schedule. WordPerfect. Yeah, they also did WordPerfect. So I think Corel did not originally make WordPerfect. I think the company WordPerfect owned WordPerfect. I don't think that was a Corel product. Correct me if I'm wrong. But Corel acquired WordPerfect and released Office. So it's basically a Microsoft Office competitor. And they released that for Linux. Then they released Photo Paint, which is like GIMP. They released their Inkscape style application, Draw, which was really good. And I don't know anything about Ventura Publisher, but I'm assuming that was kind of like Microsoft Publisher. GIMP is now online. Wow. You remember the days back in 2000 and so forth, like they said something is now online. It was like a company had gotten a website and that was a big deal. Quite wild. A new website has been launched with the interest to any Linux user who does a lot of image manipulation. Spencer Kimball, one of the creators of Linux's finest graphics tools, the GIMP, has started a web-based photo manipulation service. Users are given a whopping 50 megabytes of web space in which to upload their raw photographs. From there, the images can be processed with a variety of effects shared in others in a library, compiled into an album, or sent through e-postcards. I mean, 50 megabytes. Hi, Luna. Thanks for coming along to the stream. Appreciate it. You can join anytime you like. There is no such thing as late. Um, but this is cool. This is great. I mean, I love the fact that the power behind the website is 10 Linux boxes. And it, like, nobody says stuff like that anymore. Everybody's like, it's in the cloud. It's got a gazillion things with AWS, and it's amazing. Blah blah blah. But nobody talks about, somebody with 10 Linux boxes in their bedroom, keeping their house warm. 50 meg photo upload limit is still pretty hefty even today. I don't know, because 50 megabyte, I think what they're talking about is the total space of uploading. So if we compare that to like Google, you get gigabytes of space for free. So I think that is it. I think that's in totality. But remember, back in the day, you could buy one of those photo things from Apple, and each photograph could sit on a floppy disk. So it was like 1.4 megs per photo. So I guess that's roughly 40 something photos, which is okay. I think, Jarl, I think they meant total 50 megs total web space. But back in the year 2000, 50 megs wasn't nothing. It was probably fine. But that, so I mean, look at that. How quaint is that? Like, you could upload your photos online, and somebody in their bedroom basically is running 10 Linux boxes. I do remember Beowulf clusters. Beowulf clustering was a thing back then, which basically meant just pulling together a whole string of random boxes. I remember people were doing it with like 486s and early Pentiums. They would just get a whole bunch of random assortment of boxes, network them all together, and then use symmetric multiprocessing, where basically the whole idea is you could have really good performance computing by connecting all these Linux boxes together to make one big Borg entity. That was the theory. In reality, it didn't work that well because symmetric multiprocessing was still in its early days, and so that kind of multi-threading that was required didn't really work that well. You had to, PlayStation 3 Beowulf clustering. Yeah, that was a thing. Yeah, people used to get PlayStation 3s and network them all together with Linux on them. Was it PlayStation 3? Yeah, I think it was. But yeah, that was a thing. And you could get the extra processing power. And I think the problem with it was that you had to recompile a lot of the applications to actually understand the multi-threading or understand the cluster. Cool, really cool back in the day. Cobalt acquired Chilisoft and new ASP-capable servers. I don't know why that's Linux news. Oh, because it's okay. That's cool. So Chilisoft are a company that's still going today. I don't know if Cobalt are, and whether they parted ways again, but whoever Cobalt were, I think they were like a server company. They acquired Chilisoft, they distribute a whole bunch of software these days, mainly Windowsy, Microsofty software. Anyway, they produce new ASP-capable servers. So ASP is Advanced Server Paging, or whatever, the Microsoft Visual Studio, Visual Basic, whatever thing. Cobalt built hardware, right? So those of you lucky enough to own some hardware will know that Cobalt produce a range of powerful, compact, and generally cool servers. I don't know, we're talking about cool as in temperature. For office networking. Well, they have some more good news for people running web servers. For internet or intranet use, Cobalt have acquired Chilisoft and their ASP software for Linux. So I think what that is basically saying, if you've got Windows active server pages, like IIS kind of server pages back in the day, so whether you got running Windows NT with IIS or something like that, you could run the ASP. You couldn't run ASP pages on Linux boxes because it was purely for Windows and Windows Server. But it sounds like they had made some software that made ASP pages work for Linux. That's what I'm If that makes any sense to any of you. Oh, look, Cobalt. That wasn't supposed to happen. Anyway, um, yeah, that's again a touch of the times. Linux console is the goal. Sony executives might not be. This is nuts. The L600 has a 600 megahertz processor. Um, it is a games console. Now, I don't think this ever got to the light of day. But if you think about the Steam Deck, which is a pretty new thing, right? Um, this is effectively kind of what that is, right? Because the Steam Deck is obviously based on a sort of Arch Linux distro, but this is in the year 2000. So it's a 600 megahertz processor and will have network connectivity, and it will develop Linux compatible games, a console, internet interactive TV device designed very much for set-top use, incorporate MP3 recording and playback facilities, and have an optional infrared keyboard. So I don't know. I don't think that ever reached the light of day. But if you've ever heard of the L600 from, who is it? I don't know. I don't even know. Indremo. If you've ever heard. Rob says, perfect for playing Super Tux Kart. You know what? A 600 megahertz processor with probably not much in the way of a GPU. That's probably all it could play, even back in the year 2000. But I do remember playing Super Tux Kart. Man, that was good times on my Pentium 2. I definitely had a Pentium 2 at that time. I built it myself. It was a Pentium 2 450. I think it was a gigabyte motherboard. Built the machine myself. I was super pleased with it for about 5 minutes, and then I was like, okay, now I need a faster processor and more RAM. But 128 megabytes of RAM, I think it was pretty good for that exact time. Giles says, yes, I had the Cell processor, which is basically a supercomputing ISA, which made it really suited for clustering. Oh, you're talking about the PS3 there, yeah. Anyway, SourceForge finds Trove. This was SourceForge were a company that, this is before GitHub and all the rest. You could just upload all your source code and your apps, your open source apps, and they were all hosted by SourceForge. And then they've done something around Trove, which is a system for categorizing projects. Sounds boring. This is oh my, Neverball was one of my favorite games back in the day, says Rob. Neverball? Never have I ever heard of Neverball. What? How can I not know about Neverball? Oh my, I could even play it in my web browser now. I cannot believe I've never heard, or like I heard of Super Tux Kart and all the OG Linux games which came out around that time. Somehow this one passed me by. Cannot believe it. Thanks for letting me know. Now I'm going to have to waste my time doing that. God. Joel says, Super Tux Kart has really come along, by the way. If you haven't checked it out in the last 10 years, it's really quite remarkable. Oh, no. You're not going to make me end up playing Super Tux. Oh, my God. Look at the graphics. They're amazing. I mean, to a guy like me, they're amazing. But, yeah. Look, it's even available for Android now. Far out. Look at these graphics. Oh, man. Yeah, absolutely. These have really evolved. This is a totally different beast from the game I remember. But the game I remember was still balls of fun. It was a great game. I'm going to have to download this, and now it's available for Mac, so I've got absolutely no... Yeah, I'm going to have to download this. Thanks very much. You've now found another time waster for me. That's awesome. Just what I need. Here's a really nice ad. I love this ad because it's got the crash test dummy and an upside down Windows 3.1 style logo. I'm pretty sure that wasn't. Was that the logo for 95 as well? It was for NT4, but I don't know if it was still 95. Um, Foo Billiards. Yeah, I wasn't much of a billiards fan. Um, Thanks, Rob, for getting. Yeah. I remember this. I think. Um, yeah, I was never much of a billiards fan, so I didn't play it much. But yeah, um, but I like this advert. It's just something I like about sick of crashing and then switch to Penguin Computing, the world's most reliable Linux systems. That's nice. And here are the Penguin Computings. Look at these badass servers, all coloured in black, with what appears to be a little tux sticker on the side of the machines. Tux inside. Look at these. 1U, 2U, space conserving systems, a powerful and scalable Intel Pentium 3 and Xeon systems. They would be beefy. Back in 2000, they would have been beefy. Hey, look at that. That is some setup. So there you go. We are the internet and e-business solution provider for AMD. That's a claim. Bizrate.com, never heard of them. CBS Cable, never heard. KB Kids, never heard. Lucent Technologies, they were big. I don't know why this looks kind of janky. Look at this kind of, it looks like they cut out the background. um, anyway, um, I get a 50% commission on all Super Tux Kart sales, and so does everyone else too, come to think of it. All right, Jarl, I'll pay for that. So this is cute. This is really nice. Science in action. Linux Trio win an award. College students. Now, I think college, I don't know, think these will be English. Well, it says Dublin, actually. So when I was at school yeah, these guys are um, in Ireland, but when I was at school, college was a thing that you could do after school. So you could go all the way through school till like age 18, and then you could go to college. So it would be kind of like equivalent to a polytechnic university in other parts of the world, and you could do like a diploma, and then you could go to university. But my Rob says my first ever Linux was a cover disk of Turbo Linux 6. I believe could never get it working. I don't know what Turbo Linux. I have never heard of Turbo Linux. Japanese Linux distribution, is that right? That's probably why I have never heard of it. It doesn't even have a logo. Oh, here's a screenshot. Really super low res. It looks like KDE of some description. Looks like KDE 3. Any screenshots? Anything? It was released in the year 2000. Well, there you go. TLW was distributed in Australia. Would error on the Lilo bootloader? Well, yeah. I mean, there was a lot of that back in the day. Lilo was a bit of a beast. Grub was a massive improvement. Not a great improvement. We're still dealing with Grub 2. Um, and I don't know why this looks like it's coming down in 56K mode. It's like do I don't know why it's so slow. But anyway, yeah, I have never heard of Turbo Linux, and I thought I knew lots of stuff Linux back in the day. But there you go. Yeah, a lot of things were really annoying, and I remember having to be at Lilo and typing in lots of stuff like taking out the word quiet and changing the VGA parameters to make sure the screen buffer was right. There's a lot of that sort of hacking to make things work. You couldn't just rely on something spinning up and working. But if you hacked away long enough and you read the right books, remember this was pre-internet. Well, it wasn't pre-internet, but it was certainly you couldn't rely on having something like your mobile phone to pick up and go, what does this do, or how does this work? And it was all in books anyway. So you just had to trial and error a lot of it. And that was, honestly, it makes me sound sadistic, but that was kind of part of the fun. Um, Rob says after that it was Mandrake and went to those sites that you sell your burnt CDs. Yeah, I mean Mandrake was a major success, a major move forward. I think in so many people's eyes. Mandrake then became Mandriva a few years later. So Mandrake and Mandriva were a Red Hat derivative, if I'm not mistaken, and they had a very user-friendly kind of um, installer, and their whole kind of ethos was making the use of the systems much more um, user friendly. And so this guy here, the editor Joel Veach, he talking about running Mandrake 7, and the guy he was talking to um, was kind of disowned him for being a thickie because it was an easy to use Linux distro. Um, and that was a bit of the snobbish mentality of Linux back in the day, at least. And I guess that still is the case. There's still a bit of that. Oh, I run Arch, and if you don't run Arch, then you're not good enough. All that nonsense, which I totally do not subscribe to. Um, so Rob continues there. If it did boot, the likelihood of your modem working was slim to none. I remember that particular issue, and that was really because at the time there was a lot of what we called soft modems or Win modems, and basically the cards themselves. I worked in a PC shop. I was a technician. It was called PC World. The cards, the modems themselves, were super, super cheap, nasty pieces of rubbish. And effectively, all it was one Broadcom chip on them and a speaker, and that was it. It was just controlled through the software. So all of the interrupts, everything the system had to handle, it was very, very light on the hardware. And that was all run through the Broadcom drivers that were all written for Windows. And of course, they didn't open source them back in the day. So getting those Win modems or soft modems to work on anything other than Windows, even Mac, if you could get them to work for Macs, but it wasn't a thing. They were never made for anything other than Windows, which was the beginnings of the days of junk hardware, like stuff that you would just throw in the bin after you're done with it. Whereas, back in the years before that, stuff was made well. Like stuff didn't break. It was just solid. It was, and it could be worked. You could take a card from one computer and make it work in another computer. But, you might have had to change around in jumpers and IRQs and DMAs and all that sort of stuff. But you fundamentally could just take hardware and it would just work. Whereas when they went to these soft cards, a lot of things, especially those modems, they really, really, really that they changed so much. So I remember buying a Diamond Supra. I couldn't afford the Hayes or the US Robotics that my friend had, so I bought a Diamond Supra. I think it was a Supra, might be wrong, but it was a Diamond modem, external, run over the RS-232 port. Very good piece of hardware, very solid, like a brick. And I think it was a 56K in the year 2000, just before I got ADSL. And I was petrified of moving up to ADSL, not because I didn't want the speed. I wanted the speed of ADSL, a whopping 512k bits per second. But I knew that the modem that was provided by BT at the time, the telco, was a USB device. I was very weirded out by that. Like most of the USB devices were made for Windows, had Windows drivers, didn't work for Linux. So there was always that kind of chase up thing when a new device was made. The open source community had to find out what the device was like, kind of reverse engineer it, and then make it work for Linux. And a lot of the time that required a shim with the Windows driver in it that would connect to it. And that was kind of the better devices. Giles says, using Arch on a computer that sucks down 200 watts to run software that could work on a TI-89. I feel your pain. Rob says, can't remember the last time I had to compile the kernel to get some hardware working. It is so easy these days, not compared to what that was like. Absolutely. And I think, this magazine doesn't really go to that length of quite how hard that was, but my early, there's lots of people with lots of problems like X3 and failing fonts and all the rest. Um, but there was, I certainly had to compile the kernel on Slackware for everything. Like every single time we had to do something new, we had to compile the kernel, and that was a nightmare. Let me just find out. There was a bit in here somewhere about um, something not working. Oh yeah, here we go. This is cool. This may bring back horror stories for you guys, or it might um, bring back happy memories. But basically, this is a tutorial for newbies on Linux. This is how I learned to use Linux. BT Voyager 105 by any chance, Rob? Yes. I think it was the BT. It was looked like a slug or something like that. It was a weird looking thing. BT Voyager, Voyager 105. It certainly rings a bell. No, no, it wasn't that. It was even older than that. It looked like a slug. Maybe it wasn't a slug. It was. It kind of looked. It was like a fish. It kind of had like fins. I have memories of Indus Wrapper and basically shims for absolutely everything. Um, yeah, I can't remember what it was called, but basically it was the very first modem, the very first ADSL modem by Thomson, I think, but it branded BT. Um, but yeah, so this is what was expected of a new user to Linux, right? So they basically said, "Hey, get this on the CD. This is how you use Linux." Sparkly sadly had to use the use that on the Debian EPC as I bought with EPC with Windows XP that did not support Linux without Indus Wrapper. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know what Indus Wrapper is, basically the Indus driver was like Indus, I think, stood for like Novell. I don't know, maybe I can't remember, but basically that was the network device. Indus network device, probably. Yeah, okay, something like that. So your network driver was the Windows driver for your network card. So let's just say you had like a Rockwell or a Broadcom or a NE2000 or even a 3Com, and that only had Windows drivers. It did not, when it was released, have drivers for Linux or any other operating system. Let's just say maybe it had OS2 and NT, but it didn't have Linux drivers. So what the community came up with was the shim. Was it's kind of a wrapper around the Windows driver. So basically, I have no idea. Thank you for telling me my audio is bugged again. Um, I really hate OBS sometimes. I don't know why that is. It's either the mic or it's OBS or something like that. So apologies, but thank you. Hopefully you can hear me again. Just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. I hope. Yeah, Luna, that's right. Sony did release Linux for the PS2, and I always thought that, thank you, Rob. I always thought that was really wild that Sony, what interest would Sony have in releasing Linux for their console? Like it made commercially, it made no sense as far as I can figure out. I don't know what that was all about, but it was cool. Thanks, Jar. Yeah, so but in this wrapper worked for normal network cards, and it also worked for Wi-Fi cards as well. And the WPA supplicant, I think, worked in the same way, but just for the Wi-Fi cards, right? But I might got stuck in the old hamster wheel. I might have got that slightly wrong, but that's kind of what I remember. The Indus wrapper was the one for the network cards, and the WEP supplicant one was the shim for the wireless cards. Right? Tell me if I'm wrong, please. Correct me. But yeah, have a look at this. This is kind of sweet in a kind of weird way, but look at this. Somebody's running Windows 95C here, and they're basically going to go, we're going to install Linux on this. And so they're getting all of the information about the cards that they've got on the machine in the system manager. Like, I mean, Windows 95 was 5 years old at this point. It's interesting that they chose some Pentium Pro or Vectra, HP Vectra. It would have kind of been pretty laggy, but anyway. Windows 95, IRQ, so they're getting all the information about their hardware in advance, which was a really wise move to make, because if you didn't take that information and you didn't know what it was before you hosed Windows, these were the days that you weren't often getting installers that gave you the ability to dual boot. Most of the installers were just like, we're going to hose Windows, it's all or nothing. And that was me. Like I decided, right, I'm going for this. I hate Windows. And I didn't have a backup hard drive. I didn't have anything. I just went, let's go for it. Times are good. And I guess I could do, because I was kind of like a poor student anyway, and what did I have to lose? In fact, look at this here, modem. If you have an external modem, it is likely to be supported to help you get the best use of it, and make sure you know what type it is, V9 TK56 Flex. If it's based on a standard modem hardware like Rockwell, which was kind of the advice I took, and I just went out there and bought an external modem, and life was good. So it looks like Definite Linux was based on Red Hat 6. So then I'll skip forward, and it says using FIPS to resize your hard drive. So there's an external partitioning tool there. It wasn't part of the installer in Definite Linux. It was like a Windows or DOS based tool that you could resize resize your partitions. Pretty rudimentary looking. I mean, you had things like Partition Manager, and the Ranish Partition Manager came along a little bit later, but I guess this is what they had at the time, which is not exactly user friendly looking. And of course all of this was put into the operating system installers in years to come, where you could resize your Windows down, have Windows, dual boot it with Linux, and everything was good. So I guess that was kind of what they were saying to you. You can keep Windows and have Linux. Build on a partition. This is talking about how to partition your hard drive. This is even slightly easier than what it was when I first started with Linux, but only marginally better. And then it says, boot up the operating system installer. It's talking about the different partitions. In the days of when you would have to, you probably didn't have enough hard drive space, it made sense to make a boot partition and a home partition and a root partition. Definite Linux, and Linux in general, is pretty good at detecting hardware it can use, but you can manually specify devices too. If you had to manually specify a device, you were probably shit out of luck. Do you have any SCSI adapters? Disk Druid, I remember Disk Druid. Oh yeah, that was the earlier disk partitioning. Disk Druid is pretty easy. Basically, it's a front end for fdisk or cfdisk. It allows you to. It's still very similar to the partitioning installer that you have in Debian, for example. When you run the text mode installer for Debian, it looks pretty much like distdruid. There's not an awful lot of difference. Option 2, you can use fdisk. I don't know why anybody would want to, like if you were a, this is a newbie's guide. Why would they put fdisk in there instead of using distdruid? I'm sure that distdruid could do everything that they would need it to do. I don't know why you would want to use fdisk. I mean, I use fdisk all the time, but that's because I got used to using fdisk. In fact, I used fdisk on the very first Slackware systems. That was the only thing that you could do. Now here's the install packages, so you could go down and pick up every package you wanted, and you could manually install packages one by the looks of things. Wow, handy if disk space is tight. The problems that we had to deal with back in the day, and nowadays, you know, you think about disk space. When is the last time you really considered disk space when you were installing Linux or doing anything really? Disk space is not an issue. I have a is this 2 or yeah, this is 2 terabytes or something like that. 2 terabytes, the size of the palm of my hand right here. That's just got Al's Geek Lab video backups on it. Your post install configuration, configuring your mouse. I mean, we never consider configuring something as simple as the mouse, right? Configure TCP, IP, and all the rest. And that could be a real nightmare as well if you didn't have the right hardware set up. And then Lilo, Linux Loader. Before Grub, there was Lilo. Was it Rob that was talking about Lilo earlier on? Yeah, that was pretty tough. So Luna, tell us about your Debian experience on your EPC. Your first distro was OpenSUSE 10.1. So there was SUSE and then there was OpenSUSE, wasn't there? So like OpenSUSE was a little bit later on. They kind of moved on because this is SUSE, and it was just, yeah, it was like Red Hat was up to Red Hat 9 inclusive. Red Hat was just Red Hat. There was nothing else. And then Red Hat kind of sparked off, and there was kind of the Works WS or Red Hat Workstation, and there was Red Hat Enterprise, and that eventually became Red Hat Enterprise Linux, which we have still today. And then they spun off Fedora Core, it was called at the beginning, which is now just Fedora. SUSE Linux, I think they spun off, and same sort of idea. They spun off and they had SUSE, and then they had OpenSUSE later on. So they had the commercial SUSE, and they had their open one, which is what you're talking about there. Was it any good, Luna? Was OpenSUSE good? Like I never really used SUSE. I tried Yast a couple of times and it looked quite advanced, but I never got into it. I think by 2002, 2003, I was already into the Debian ecosystem, and it wasn't the most up-to-date Linux distro in the world, but I just much preferred apt-get and all the rest. It just made life so much easier. I had been through dependency hell with Red Hat. I was mainly using Red Hat to begin with. And then I found this new world of apt, and it resolved my dependencies automatically. And I was like, where have you been all my life? And I kind of just never looked back. And so I've always kind of been in the Debian, not Debian itself, but I did use Debian to begin with, but then I moved on to Ubuntu and Pop OS and stuff like that later on. So I kind of, yeah, never looked back. I never really went back to RPM-based distros after a while. Yast was the biggest selling point, which stood for yet another setup tool, if I'm not mistaken. And so I think that the idea was that the tool could do all the things, like it could install the software, it could configure your system, and it was quite well made, so it could do a lot of stuff in a simple fashion. But again, I can't really remember much of it. Look at this, KDE 1.12, oh my. GNOME 1.0, Star Office. Do you remember Star Office? So that was before LibreOffice. It was Star Office, and then there was OpenOffice. So Star was the company that made, yeah, and then I think it was open sourced Wild. And WordPerfect, that would have been Corel, but it was before the Corel version 2000 download edition. Now this is interesting. It had the Riser journaling file system. Does anybody in the live chat remember Riser FS, the filing system? Very controversial. I think it still exists today, but nobody uses it, I don't think. And yeah, Rob, you are right. The swap partition size would be about twice the size of your RAM. So if you had a 1 gig memory, you would have a 2 gig swap partition. Yeah. So I mean, Riser was created by a guy called Hans Riser, and apparently it was quite a good file system compared to what would have been ext2 at the time. It had journaling as opposed to ext2, which did not have journaling. ext3 came along and added journaling later. So it meant if you switched off your machine without proper power off, you would have to do an E2FS CK and check the file system for errors because there was no journal back in file extended 2 file system. But Riser had journaling and it had a few other little benefits in terms of performance. Problem is, Hans Riser murdered his wife. True story. And so Riser FS kind of disappeared after that, strangely. Yeah, okay, it has been dropped out of the kernel now. Good. Giles says, I really wish there was a Linux distro that was non-profit and community orientated, upstream, and also took marketing and the user experience seriously. Surely there has to be I take it when you say upstream, I would take it like it's the top tier, like Red Hat and Debian and all the rest. So I'm assuming that you're talking about up at the top tier of Linux distributions there by upstream. Surely there is a distro that ticks all of those boxes. If we go to the Wikipedia page, I would have thought like Slackware, for example, would be, love it or hate it, would be an example of one of those. Yeah, so Slackware is basically the oldest, the OG Linux distribution, and I think, it's non-profit, it is community-based, it's right at the top of the tree, it's been going forever, and whether they take user experience, I have not used Slackware in a million years. Whether they take it seriously, I cannot tell you. But I do know this. They were very serious and still are about being a completely open source, not-for-profit distribution. And the same can probably be said of Debian, right? I mean, it's not-for-profit. The guy called it Debian because he fell in love with Deborah, his then wife, Ian Murdoch, right? So it's not exactly a story about for-profit. And then look at all of the things that have spawned off of Debian. I mean, I guess it's not super user friendly, but then again, it's not super user unfriendly either. So it really depends on what you're looking for in a Linux distro. Like, how easy do you want it to be? Then there's Red Hat, of course, and look at all the distribution versions or forks of Red Hat. Where did the logo go? I want the Red Hat logo. Maybe because it's commercially bound. Tamu, these are all really old, yeah. AOSP. What is AOSP? Does anybody know what AOSP is? No idea. So these are all other little distros, I guess, that are kind of hanging around. So if we look at the ones that are still running these days, these I guess are completely non-DOS Linux. Wow. But these are all ones that kind of exist today, and they all have specific needs and uses and so forth. Never heard of AOSP. but it's obviously got quite a, it must be an Android, it must be Android, yeah, because it's graphene. But you could have a look into any of these ones, the ones that are still around today. Maybe they're quite good. I don't know. You'd have to have a look into them. I've heard of Void Linux before. I don't know if it's any good, but yeah, there's lots of them out there, and some of them do take open source and being a community player and all these things very seriously. Rob says Debian is nice. It's just not very bleeding edge, which could be a good thing if you want that. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about it is that if we look at all the derivatives of Debian, you could pick any of these and go, I would like, pretty much a vanilla Debian, but it's just a little bit more up to date than Debian, which would give you the bleeding edge. One of these has got to do that. One of these. I mean, look at them all, right? There's just so many derivatives. And so you just scroll along to here, find one of these that, in fact, ChatGPT is going to tell you which one of these fulfills your criteria. So there's quite a lot of them. I'm sure one of those is definitely going to fulfill that requirement. There's just so many of them. But this is I like this diagram. It's just insane to think about how many Linux distributions we have, and obviously how many are still thriving in 2025. Just incredible. Look at that picture. It's just massive. And then all the derivatives of Ubuntu. And it really just goes to show the success of certain distributions. We still have one Knoppix derivative going. And look at all this red hat. So there you go. Was there anything else that was interesting here? License to Thrill. Looking at licensing, talking about introducing people, I guess because this was Linux Format 01, they were listening to, they were talking about, for the first time, about open source and what open source was versus free software. And I think they talk about, here's Bill Joy, and they talk about, Richard Stallman, RMS, and all sorts of stuff there. And then they talk about tech, tex, if you call it that, but tech I think is the way you're supposed to say it, and LaTeX, which I've used a few times when I was at uni writing papers. I kind of miss tech, to be honest with you, because you could write some really good looking professional papers and things like that, and it would all be, I just write it in the markup language, and I kind of, does anybody use tech? It was an interesting platform. I think it's still around, right? I don't think it's gone away, but I think probably the amount of people that actually use LaTeX or tech is probably diminishing significantly. But really, it would be interesting to hear who's using LaTeX out there. This is a sort of desktop publishing software of the time. Adobe. This is interesting. Crunchbang, says Rob, was really nice. Very sad when that project died. Absolutely. There was a version of Crunchbang which was a derivative, right? There's the original Crunchbang. And then Bunsen Labs continued it. And then there's Crunchbang Plus Plus. If you're interested. I don't know if it's any good or whatnot, but a lot of people felt the same way as you because Crunchbang was a cool Linux distro. Jarl, I have a novel idea for a software license. What's that? Jarl said, I had a math professor who would give me $20 an hour to typeset his lecture notes in LaTeX. Wow. So he could... Did he know how to write in LaTeX? He just couldn't be bothered. That's cool. It's really interesting. Dear. I find this interesting, and I never knew that it was a thing. So, desktop publishing by Adobe. Now, Adobe, I always thought were an organization who swore
They didn't want to have anything to do with Linux. We're not going to release any of the software in Linux. Screw you guys. And I do know this is a trial beta version. Did this ever make it? Does anybody know? That's wild. Um, cool. Rating looking good. Yes, he didn't like it, says Jarl. Hopefully I'm saying your name like Jarl. I've been saying it a lot now and I'm realizing I might not be saying it right, so apologies. Um, did anybody have a book like Linux the Complete Reference? Now, I didn't have this exact one, but I had a similar tome. I can't remember what the name of it was, but it was like Linux the Essential Guide or something. And it was just like this. It was um, a massive, massive tome of text. And um, it was helpful in places, but I don't know. I don't know. Um, so, look at this. This is like, so this is an ad for another one of the future magazines published is PC Plus. So I remember PC Plus, it was, the magazine that people would download, buy when they wanted to buy a new PC, basically. Um, and again, this is kind of perfect to show the sign of the times, right? The year 2000, and they're talking about screamingly fast PCs, 1 gigahertz. So AMD and Intel were breaking the 1 gigahertz speed barrier in the year 2000. That is crazy. That's just insane. Like, to think, where are we now? Like, can we get what's the upper speed barrier in terms of clock? I mean, it was all about clock back then, right? The higher the number, the better it was. And then we eventually found that we could do multi-threading and symmetric multiprocessor and all the rest, multi-core, blah blah blah. It was around this time, around 2001, that I met my then wife, and my interests in building computers waned. Up until this point, it was super interesting, and I guess it wasn't just that I think my life got busy, it was also that the computers got less exciting, because up until then it was like, get the big numbers, get the big gigahertz, get the big, it's 1.2 gigahertz, now it's 1.5 gigahertz. But there was that point in time when just around 2002, PCs started to become more of a commodity and less of a toy, less of a geek thing that you could really enjoy. And I'm sad that those days are kind of gone. Yeah. The BSD license doesn't stop Sony from suing PlayStation reverse engineers. Sony. I'll be honest, my eyes tend to glaze over when people start talking licenses. Yes, I think you're not alone there, Rob. People do stop wanting to read things when you talk licenses, so I skipped over that quite quickly, as you may have noticed. Again, this is a bit of a sign of the times. The software reviews here, looking at the themes. So Window Manager, if you remember the Window Managers, there was Window Maker, I think this is for, what is it, desktop configuration. One of the great features of Linux, latest around the Window Managers, is the themability. So I think this was a Perl script to be run from the shell, which can understand the management of themes. For many of the most popular window managers, including AfterStep, Blackbox, Enlightenment. Oh my goodness. Do you remember Enlightenment? And how people used to rice their desktops and make it look super cool? Whatever happened to Enlightenment? It's still around, I think. But for a while, it's like an E16 or something like that. That was what I remember using for, oh yeah. Kind of looks exact. Oh no, this is different. It looks kind of more modern here. But look at that, copyright 2021. So it's not been updated in a while. But yeah, this is a bit more modern than what I remember. And they had all sorts of little fancy widgets to rice your desktop and make it look cool. Um, it was pretty cool. Rob says, bring back the desktop cube. Oh God, I remember the desktop cubes. What was that with? It was a compositor, wasn't it? Compiz, yes, Compiz. And you could press a button, a hotkey, and like you'd have a virtual desktop, and it would spin around, and you'd get something. It was totally unnecessary, but at the same time, you'd show your friends who were on Windows, and they'd be like, "Droll, so jealous." And the thing is that even Macs didn't get the equivalent of that until many, many years later, and Windows is kind of, yes, it's kind of got virtual desktops now with Windows 11, but it's not got the same garish, wonderful glow. So, yeah, Compiz was cool. What happened? Like, why did that go away? It seemed like we were living in the future for a while. Like, what happened? Why did Compiz and all that sort of stuff go away? I don't understand. Um, I like. Grip was a CD player and ripper. You could play your CDs. Again, sign of the times. And it says it's not just a substitute for your CD player because you can throw out the tape recorder too. You can rip, and I remember using grip to rip my friends' CDs and then add them to my MP3 collection and loving life. It would take an age to download all the music off the CD, rip them all, but I would do it by the bucket load and I would do it happily. It was wild. Bring back the desktop cube, says Rob. Oh yeah, I've already read that. When you close a window, it would burst into flames. Yes, that's right. Yeah, desktop cube, Compiz. No, my goodness, they're still doing it. It's still in like fairly recent times. There's 2022.
Terra is the IT
no
painkiller.
adverts, please. I can't have adverts in adverts. Anyway, that's pretty wild. Yeah, I remember that with fond memories. There you go. There's one in Ubuntu. Here's the Wikipedia page with what looks like GNOME 1. Yeah, that's I think one of the original Fedora Core desktops there. Look at the Fedora Core. That's quite cool wallpaper actually. I kind of like that. And you can see behind that the original icons from Red Hat. So Red Hat 8 or Red Hat 9 came out with this kind of theme of icons, and I thought they were really professional, really well made icons. I don't know what happened to them, but you can see the theming throughout. They were really, really well made icons, like some graphic artist, and I thought they were really nice. I don't know what happened. Some things they just disappear. But look at that. That is cool. There's no denying it. Your computer does that. It's cool, right? And I miss that. I miss those days a lot. Why did they go away? ATI and NVIDIA drivers became increasingly common on Linux. Really? Wobbly windows and physics models for window moving. It was completely, none of this was necessary, but it was really important. If you were a geek, you had to do it. 2008, 2009, a conference call was held between the developers of Compiz, Compiz++, Nomad, and Compiz Fusion. It was decided to merge the projects into a unified project, simply named Compiz, with a unified roadmap. My goodness, that sounds like a really sensible thing to do. Why do we not have sensible things in the open source communities anymore like that? And then in 2019, so it looks like it ended around 2010, went to Ubuntu, obviously, to die. Canonical even hired a developer to do it full time. And then Spilsbury announced that he'd left Canonical and instead he had no plans for porting Compiz to Wayland. Ah, that's why it died. Wayland. Should have known. Anyway, there's a group of developers that maintain it as of 2019, but it doesn't sound like it's being worked on anymore. Look at this. Oh, it's too small. Look at that. Look at that. Look at the wavy. Look at the wavy. And look at the magic lamp. That one was annoying, but that one made it over to Mac OS. I remember the early Mac OSs when you minimized things to the taskbar, it kind of did that, but in reverse. And it was annoying and it was slow, and I didn't, yeah, never got that. Here's the burn effect you were talking about, Rob. Yeah, look at that. The things we used to do with our computers. It was just fun, it was silly, and there was no need for it, but I don't know. I think we're kind of missing that these days. I don't know what happened. Maybe I'm just getting old. Get off my lawn. Thanks, Luna. Yes, AOSP is an Android open source project. I kind of figured that out as I was saying it. I was like, yeah, that's Android. FreeAmp, if you remember Winamp, I think there was XMMS as well, and I think FreeAmp was kind of like a shiny GNOME version of the same thing with IMDb lookup and a few other things. But there's FreeAmp, and I love this article here because it says MP3, or to give it its full name, MPEG 1 or 2, Layer 3, is quickly becoming the format of choice. This was the time of Napster and LimeWire and the whole revolution of digital music. And Apple had come out with the iPod, and it said, rip, burn, go, and the whole world was just like amazing. Music was on the go for the first time. It was wild, really, really cool. There's a fractal landscape generator. Remember Fractint? Well, there was a Linux one that made landscapes. Totally irrelevant, totally pointless, but hey. There's an IDE called Moonshine. Don't know. Oh, it's for Qt, or Qt, sorry, and C++. And then they're talking about distributions at the time. Corel Linux. We talked about that earlier on, but Corel Linux 1.0. I don't know if there was a Corel Linux 2.0, but they said it was promising. They've worked hard in many areas. There's little variety in the available desktops. X network configuration, blah blah blah. The sheer amount of installation problems we've had come across makes it hard for us to recommend. If they can sort out the troubles and produce a reliable installer on our next release, Corel Linux will be well worth keeping an eye on. I feel sorry for the guys who had to review these things and all the troubles that they had, and eventually trying to get things to work, and finally getting things to work. Because they would have to do it on bare metal. They couldn't do it in VMs, right? Or they probably didn't do it in VMs. There you go. The GNOME desktop environment with the Enlightenment window manager. That was a mix-up. There's Definite Linux. That was the one on the cover disk. And that's Window Maker, which was an alternative to OpenStep, right? Or NextStep. It was kind of the derivative from that lineage of, the Nextcube and, Steve Jobs' Next computer. And there was the OpenStep initiative, and it all kind of looked very similar. And there's Window Maker, which kind of looked similar to that. And they said that Definite Linux was really good. I don't think that went very far though. Definite, it's not even on there. The word definite is not in this. Is this proper text? Yeah, it is. Okay. Definite Linux never made it past 1.0, obviously. Win Linux. You can set up Linux from your Windows machine, but not a good product. Then there's that Red Hat. That thing will never take off. Amarok was my favorite music player of choice. Amarok, yes, I remember that. That was for KDE. That was very good. It was a little bit bloated. It was a little bit Volkswagen Amarok. But it was so featureful. It's still going. Oh my god. Yeah, it was like a full screen app. Like you launch it and you could fully immerse yourself. You had all sorts of stuff. I can't believe it's still going. That is wild. Look at that. You had a Wikipedia bit automatically populate. You had the album covers. You had the current track over here. You had everything. It was a massive jukebox waiting to happen. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. There's good old Debian, and that's running FVWM 95. So that's a window manager that kind of made itself look like a poor man's Windows 95 with the start menu. Um, and that was what you got in Debian 2. I remember the first Debian Linux distribution I used was was it Woody? I think it was. It was Debian 3, and it did everything I needed, and I never looked back. I think I said that earlier on, but it was good times. It was simpler times. Absolutely, Rob. Look at that. That kind of brings back a lot of great memories. Even that sort of green shade of the background, that was the default color. I don't know why that brings back nostalgia that I just love, but yeah, I kind of want to install Debian 3 for no good reason. Does anybody remember Etch was my first Debian? What was Etch? Was that like 4? I think. Does anybody remember playing X-Bill, where you had to basically, I can't remember how you played it, but you had to get rid of all the Windows operating systems from your networks. And then you had fires as well, and you had to put out the network fires with this little bucket over here. It was quite cool. It was really funny. Yeah, Etch was 4. Right, okay. Yeah. There's Mandrake. Looks kind of really futuristic if you compare it to Debian, right? And potentially even Red Hat. Mandrake with KDE. That would have been KDE 1, which is, yeah, looked pretty awesome. And look at that installer there. It had, this partition manager which you could, graphically resize things, and yeah, that streets ahead in terms of usability, especially from an installation perspective. And so no wonder they gave it 10 out of 10. I didn't actually use it very much. I wasn't a big Linux Mandrake user because I was already a Red Hat or a Debian, but I feel like I missed out, to be honest with you. And here is Caldera Open Linux. I think they got sued, or they sued people, I can't remember. But the Open Linux Business Desktop, I don't think there was anything special about it. And there's SUSE with Yast. That'll be Yast version 1, yeah. Yast 2, I saw that it was more graphical, I seem to recall. But they gave it an 8 out of 10. So anyway, I think that's probably going to do it for me for this video. I thought it would be fun to just talk through a time when Linux was a thing, and computers were fun, and journalistic integrity was important, and we didn't have lots of AI slop. And so it was a very, very different time that we were living in, and it was only 25 years ago. And so to come full circle to talk about why I started this live stream is because I talked about how Linux Format magazine have just presented their final print in May of this year after 25 years. And so is this the end of Linux? No. Is this the end of Linux magazines? Probably. There are probably a couple other ones that still exist, but who's going to the shop? Are you going to the shop these days to buy a Linux magazine? Probably not. Are you subscribed to getting one printed? Probably not. Will you ever? Unlikely. So what's going to happen to all of that journalistic quality writing? I think the answer is pretty scary, pretty sad, but is anything going to change? Hopefully. Why don't we get together and do something cool? Anyway, I thank you very, very much for watching Al's Geek Lab, doing this little impromptu live stream. I sometimes enjoy doing this. If you enjoyed watching this, then give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, comment and let me know if you'd like me to do more of these when the mood takes me and I need to do my creative outlet, which I enjoy. But for all of the people who have watched me rant away for the last hour or so, so Rob and Jarl and Was Josh and Luna and whoever else, I thank you so much for chiming in. It's really nice. It's really good fun to have some people chatting away in the chat. If you do want to subscribe to the channel to get more early access videos, of course you can check me out on Patreon. That's patreon.com/AlsGeekLab. Of course you can join us on the YouTube side of things as well. Just join the channel. And I'm also on Substack as well. So plenty of other places to check us out. Yeah, love you have along with all the extra stuff, all the extra fun that we have on Patreon, etc. Anyway, with that all said, I will end broadcast now and let you guys enjoy the rest of your day.